With YouTube attacking alternative media, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon for just $1 per month. Link below. Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Matt Jarbo. This is the Mundane Matt channel, and this is a pretty sad story. It's one that made me immediately think back to Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but instead of, a bear coming home and finding Goldilocks asleep in their bed, this is a drunk dude who mistakes his neighbor's home for his home and then kills the guy thinking he was an intruder. Sometimes you just can't make up the weird stuff that comes out of life, the tragic moments that just feel like they could have easily been avoided. I mean, at no fault of the person who died, obviously. So it says here that in Raytown, Missouri, a man was charged with involuntary manslaughter after he allegedly went into his neighbor's home thinking it was his own, then choked the homeowner to death. Police believe Michael G. Augustine was drunk at the time he allegedly killed 60-year-old Clifton King. So this guy was drunk, stumbling home, went into the wrong house, thinking it was his, and found an intruder inside, and some stuff happened. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, how does one do that? How does a person mistake their home for somebody else's home? Well, it's actually not as difficult as you might think. We have what they call block housing, right? Certain designs. I might be wrong on that terminology, but you might see this when you go into a neighborhood. You'll see a certain neighborhood will have houses that have the same design, not necessarily in a row, but a pattern that ultimately repeats itself down the way or around the corner. You'll see a house that looks identical, the same layout as another one. And it can sometimes be confusing unless there is certain decorations or things that are outside to give it its own identifying look. I think that's what happened here. I really do. I think this guy saw what he thought was his house because ultimately it's the same design. And we end up just, he went in and was just drunk and confused. And I'm not absolving him of his crime. Absolutely not. I'm merely pointing out that this is probably the simplest explanation as to why it happened. Now, King died in his front yard Friday night after he came to his door to find Augustine, one of his neighbors, trying to come inside. So he comes downstairs, middle of the night, finds a belligerent drunk dude trying to get in through the front door. They get into a scuffle, and then it goes south. Neighbors told WDAF that Augustine, who lives further down the block, believed that it was his home and that King had broken in. Again, going back to my earlier point about how houses look the same. In some of these neighborhoods, some of these, these suburbs or whatever, they all kind of look similar. During the incident, Augustine called 911 to report that he had an intruder in a chokehold, but when officers arrived at his address, no one was there. They later found both men about a block up the street at King's house. So the guy thought he was also doing the right thing. This is where it gets even more complicated. This is where, I mean, like, seriously, there is just, it's so tragic because Augustine here thought he was defending his home. He thought he was doing the right thing. He got this intruder, so he thought, in a headlock, in a chokehold, and was holding him, called the cops to get them to come and arrest him in order to protect his property. And it says here that according to the court documents, police believe Augustine was drunk because his speech was incoherent, and the officers noted a strong smell of alcohol. A neighbor, who did not want her face to appear on camera because the incident made her concerned for her own safety, said she watched the paramedics try to revive King, a military veteran, for about half an hour. Now, the neighbor who didn't want her face to appear on camera because she felt that it made her concerned for her own safety, it's a very odd way to look at it. This, if anything, at this particular point, unless there's more details that are going to come out that show that it was premeditated and that it wasn't involuntary, wasn't an accident necessarily, then why would this woman be afraid for any kind of repercussion, right? Like, it was literally a drunk dude stumbling to the wrong house, thinking it was his own, tried to defend it, and killed the guy inside accidentally. Again, in no way am I showing any kind of remorse towards Augustine here. This dude made every mistake in the book. But when you start kind of compiling all the info together, you get to see the larger picture. And the larger picture tells you that this whole thing was an accident. So the woman here says, he served our country, and that was not an honorable way to treat him. I think it's sad. It's sad. Someone had to give up their life because someone was so messed up they didn't know it wasn't their home. He was a veteran, but that wasn't why he was killed. It's a weird it's a weird mindset that we have in this country when it comes to this situation. This is a random thing, had nothing to do with the person's previous military service, you know. And it's sad that the veteran died, but it would be sad if the guy wasn't a veteran. It's that whole thing, trying to equate it as being this military issue is very odd to me. It might just be me picking up on it subtly, but it's one of those weird things. It was a human. Whether or not they were in the military has no bearing on the story. Now, other neighbors said that King had been homeless at one time in his life because he couldn't find a job, but since moving on the block, he was friendly and kind. Some feel guilty about not immediately calling the police themselves when they heard the commotion. They said there are often arguments on the block, and some say it's better for them not to get involved. Now, I understand that. When I lived in Los Angeles, I heard a lot of arguing in my apartment building, and then down the road, lots of people crammed together. You don't really know when it's the right time to call the authorities. You don't know if it's your place to call the authorities. We only called the authorities one time on our neighbors because we heard stuff breaking, and so we called them. And then they came, they investigated, and then the dispatch called us back to tell us what happened. I'm not even kidding you. They called us back to go, hey, you guys want to know what went down? And it was just a dispute, and a bull fell and broke. That's what it was. So I get that. I do understand that. And they probably should have all called the cops if they started feeling like it was growing up. But in these neighborhoods, you know, when there's loud commotion and you hear lots of these kind of things happen, you become desensitized to it. How many times do you hear a car alarm going off and just go, all right? You don't know if it's someone breaking into a car or if it's someone just accidentally pulling on the handle or bumping it or something, and it just went off and it has to go off on its own. But we hear it so frequently that we just stop caring, right? So it's one of those conditioning factors as well. Prosecutors have charged Augustine with first-degree involuntary manslaughter, but neighbors said he was already posted bond and moved out of the area. There was no answer at the door when people tried to speak with, or when the news tried to speak with him. Yeah, so he posted bond and then he took off. I don't blame him, to be honest with you. That is something that you don't live down in your neighborhood. You know, you would forever be known as the drunk guy who killed the neighbor because you mistook homes for his place for yours. I mean, there's nothing good about this story. Like, there's nothing good about it. My take on these things are always trying to figure out the why. Understand the why. And you can see here that this was just a case of mistaken identity of the home. And it's no indication whether or not that this guy knew who he was or knew anything about him, just that their homes look similar. And it's tragic any way you look at the story. It really is. So I hope that that he can get you know, counseling for alcoholism, because clearly I think that's a problem. And I don't know what the courts are going to do to him. I don't know how they're going to get him. He'll probably take a plea deal down to just involuntary manslaughter, serve maybe 2 years in prison or whatever, and that will be it. But at the end of the day, a man's life is over because of a case of mistaken identity. And there's no way to come back from that. And there's no way to apologize for that completely. And I hope that Augustine here, with the time he has left on this earth, spends it trying to make amends for a mistake that will haunt him until his time. Anyway, what do you guys think about this? Let me know in the comments below. I am curious to know your guys' thoughts. Be sure to thumbs up the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Share it around if you want to help get the word out. If you want to support it, Patreon's the best way, or links below in the video description. Or if you just want to kind of, I don't know, mundane Matt and chill, hang out, watch more content, you can do so right now.